The sun had not yet fully risen over the modest neighborhoods on the east side of Los Angeles. Arthur Pendelton sat at the old wooden table in his small kitchen, staring at the stack of papers before him. He was in his mid-70s, every line on his face a map charting memories from the Korean War, years of hard labor, and the workplace accident that had turned his life into a nightmare these past few years. His hands, once strong enough to bend iron, now trembled slightly. The thick file folder in front of him represented his last hope: doctor's reports, witness statements, proof of years of paid premiums for his disability claim with Apex Assurance. The compensation he believed he deserved after falling from scaffolding at a construction site, resulting in permanent injury, had been denied for months due to bureaucratic hurdles and nonsensical reasons. Today, he would go one last time, in person, to the company headquarters to explain that there must be a mistake. He rose slowly, his slight limp from the accident more pronounced in the quiet morning. He walked to his small living room. On the wall hung a black and white photo of him as a young soldier and a faded wedding picture with his late wife. He took a deep breath. This wasn't just about money. This was a battle for the dignity of a man who had worked honestly his entire life, served his country, and now felt abandoned by the system he'd paid into. He put on his cleanest, albeit oldest jacket, tucked the file carefully under his arm, and leaning on his cane, he left the house. As he walked towards the bus stop, despite the pain each step brought, his face held a look of quiet determination. Around the same time, across town, Keanu Reeves was polishing the tank of his classic Norton Commando motorcycle. He had to visit the downtown headquarters of Apex Assurance that day to handle some details regarding a complex production insurance policy for a major film project. He disliked these kinds of corporate errands, but knew they were part of his responsibilities. He pulled on a dark gray hooded sweatshirt, comfortable cargo pants, and his old road-dusted riding boots. He donned a black baseball cap and non-prescription eyeglasses with slightly tinted lenses, hoping they would make him blend in. His goal was to get the paperwork done quickly and escape the soulless buildings as soon as possible. He swung a leg over the motorcycle and merged into the LA traffic, internally questioning why humans created systems that often made life more complicated. Stepping through the massive glass doors of the Apex Assurance building, Keanu was met by the artificial chill of aggressive air conditioning and an oppressive silence. The lobby was vast, modern, but utterly devoid of warmth. Dominated by shades of gray and beige, the floors gleamed with cold ceramic tiles, and the walls displayed corporate graphics and meaningless slogans. Securing your future. People of various ages and backgrounds sat on hard plastic chairs, clutching files, waiting anxiously. A palpable tension filled the air, a mixture of quiet frustration with bureaucratic slowness and desperate hope. The only sounds were the mechanical click of the number dispenser, an occasional cough, or an impatient sigh breaking the heavy silence. Keanu took a number from the machine and found an empty chair in a corner. He pulled a slim volume of poetry from his messenger bag but found himself unable to read. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the people, the atmosphere. He noticed Arthur Pendelton sitting a few rows ahead. The elderly man's anxious demeanor, the way he clutched his worn folder, his occasional deep sighs, it all caught Keanu's attention. He knew how many people like Arthur got lost in these bureaucratic mazes, how legitimate needs could be dismissed by indifferent clerks or nonsensical rules. He thought of his own privileged position and felt a momentary pang of unease. As he waited, he observed the staff's behavior more closely. The clerks behind the partitions mostly wore sullen expressions, their voices mechanical and disinterested when speaking to clients. One young woman in particular, whom Keanu would later learn was named Chloe Vance, stood out. She rolled her eyes while on the phone, gave short, clipped answers to questions, and generally acted as if every person approaching her desk was an imposition. Occasionally, a man in an expensive suit, whom he'd later identify as the office manager, Preston Holloway, would stroll through the office area, the staff visibly tensed whenever he passed. Holloway only paused briefly to interact with a couple of well-dressed, important-looking clients, ignoring everyone else. Even in these small details, Keanu sensed the cold, discriminatory undercurrent of the office culture. He glanced back at Arthur, noticing the flicker of hope in the old man's eyes seemed to be fading with each passing minute. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Arthur's number flashed on the display. The old man slowly rose, leaning heavily on his cane, and made his way to Chloe Vance's partition. Keanu found himself watching, almost holding his breath. "Number?" Chloe asked without looking up from her computer screen. Arthur stated his number, his voice slightly trembling. "My name is Arthur Pendelton," he said politely, offering the thick file. "I'm here about the denial of my disability claim. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. All my documents are here." Chloe sighed audibly and took the file, flipping through the pages quickly, carelessly. "Yes, Mr. Pendleton, I see your file," she recited, still focused on her screen. "Denied. Reason: failure to submit supplementary form 14B within 60 days, pursuant to Policy Section 6, subsection C." Arthur stared at her, bewildered. "But how can that be? I'm certain I submitted everything on time. Here's the proof." He tried to point out a specific dated document in the file. Chloe held up a hand, stopping him. "Look, sir," her voice was impatient now, "what the system shows is what it shows. If something was missing, that's your responsibility. We process hundreds of files. We can't give everyone personalized explanations. You should have read your policy carefully before signing." Arthur's face fell. "But I did read it. I've paid premiums for years. This accident wasn't my fault. I have doctor's reports." His voice cracked with desperation. "I was in the hospital during that period, recovering from surgery. How could I submit a form? 3 days. You're denying my entire claim for just 3 days?" He fumbled through the file again, trying to show the hospital admission papers. Chloe showed no flicker of empathy. She even smirked slightly. "I'm sorry, but insurance companies aren't charities, Mr. Pendleton. We have rules. Your being in the hospital unfortunately doesn't change the deadline. Perhaps you're exaggerating your condition?" The last sentence was a clear, demeaning insinuation. Keanu could hear the exchange from his seat. He saw the hope drain completely from the old man's face, replaced by profound disappointment and humiliation. He saw Arthur's shoulders slump further. The callous indifference of the clerk made his stomach turn. Just as Arthur opened his mouth to say something, perhaps one last desperate plea, the office manager, Preston Holloway, emerged from behind the partitions. Holloway was a man in his late 40s, impeccably dressed in an expensive Italian suit, his hair perfectly coiffed, radiating an air of smug self-importance. "Is there a problem here, Chloe?" he asked, his voice carrying a tone of false concern, while his eyes scanned Arthur dismissively. Chloe immediately straightened up, adopting a complaining tone. "No, sir. Mr. Pendleton here is just having difficulty understanding the denial of his claim. I've explained the procedure, but he insists on arguing." Preston Holloway now turned his full attention to Arthur, his smile condescending. "Mr. Pendleton," he said, his voice smooth but patronizing, "I understand these insurance matters can be complex, but Chloe has explained the situation. Our decisions are final. If you still wish to contest it, perhaps you should consider consulting an attorney." He knew full well what suggesting a lawyer meant to a man like Arthur. It meant give up. Arthur made one last attempt. "But sir, my documents are here. I can prove I'm right." Holloway cut him off sharply. "Look," his voice hardened now, "you're taking up valuable time here. We don't have the resources to deal with your personal problems. The decision has been made. Please allow the next person in line to be served." He gestured dismissively toward the door. This was the final blow for Arthur. His face turned ashen, his eyes filled with unshed tears. His file slipped from his trembling hands, scattering papers across the cold ceramic floor. He didn't even have the strength to bend down and pick them up. He simply turned, head bowed, and began walking slowly, haltingly, towards the exit, his dignity shattered. The other people in the waiting room looked away, uncomfortable witnesses to this small, cruel act of humiliation. As Arthur shuffled painfully toward the door, a heavy silence hung in the office. No one spoke. Chloe had already turned back to her computer, and Holloway looked around with an air of self-satisfied authority. But then, from the corner of the room, a calm, clear voice cut through the silence. "Excuse me." All heads turned toward the sound. Keanu Reeves had quietly risen from his chair. He had pulled back the hood of his sweatshirt, but his cap and glasses were still on. Preston Holloway frowned. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked, the dismissive tone back in his voice. Keanu walked towards Holloway, his steps unhurried but deliberate. "I overheard your conversation with Mr. Pendleton," Keanu said, his voice low but resonant. "You told him you didn't have time for his personal problems and that he should stop bothering your office." Holloway's expression tightened. "Yes, I did. This is a place of business." "This isn't just business," Keanu interrupted, his voice gaining an edge. "This is about basic human decency, and perhaps," he added, looking pointedly at Holloway, "professional negligence." He turned towards Arthur, who had stopped near the door, looking back in confusion. "Mr. Pendleton, do you feel your case was reviewed fairly?" Arthur stammered. Well, no, I don't think so." Holloway bristled. "Look, sir, this doesn't concern you. Who are you to interfere in our company procedures?" This was the moment. Keanu slowly, deliberately reached up and removed first his sunglasses, then his baseball cap. Under the harsh, fluorescent lights, the instantly recognizable face was revealed. An audible gasp swept through the lobby. Chloe Vance's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Preston Holloway's confident facade instantly crumbled. His jaw dropped and the color drained from his face. People in the waiting room stood up, whispering excitedly, pulling out their phones. "No way! Keanu Reeves!" "Zrение. Это действительно он?" Preston Holloway struggled to regain his composure, but his voice trembled. Mr. Reeves, what a surprise to see you here. Was there a problem, sir? How can we assist you?" His tone had done a complete 180-degree turn. "The problem isn't with me," Keanu stated, his gaze unwavering. "The problem is how you just treated that gentleman." He gestured towards Arthur. "And I have to wonder if that treatment is standard practice at Apex Assurance." Chloe quickly jumped in. "No, sir. Absolutely not. It was just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Keanu echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Dismissing a person's legitimate concerns without even looking at his documents? Telling him he's wasting your time? Suggesting he's exaggerating his condition? Is that a misunderstanding?" He turned his calm but piercing gaze towards Chloe. She shrank back, unable to meet his eyes. Holloway intervened again. "Mr. Reeves, please. Our staff can sometimes be under pressure." "Pressure doesn't excuse disrespect," Keanu stated flatly. He walked over to where Arthur's papers lay scattered, bent down, and carefully gathered them. He straightened up and handed the folder back to Arthur, then turned back to Holloway. "I'd like to see Mr. Pendleton's file myself." Holloway hesitated, clearly panicked, but facing Keanu Reeves, and potentially the representative of a major corporate client. "Thunder Road Pictures," Keanu clarified coolly. "We're discussing the renewal of our multi-million-dollar liability policy." He knew he had no choice. He reluctantly led Keanu and Arthur back towards Chloe's partition, instructing her to pull up the file again. Keanu leaned over the partition slightly, examining the screen alongside Holloway and Chloe. He pointed to the denial code. "Explain this missing form referenced in subsection 6C. Chloe nervously tried to explain the technicality. Keanu listened patiently, then picked up one of Arthur's hospital discharge papers from the file. "This document clearly states Mr. Pendleton was incapacitated due to major surgery during the exact 60-day window you mentioned. Your own policy, section 11A, allows for extensions under documented medical emergencies. Why wasn't this applied?" Holloway and Chloe exchanged panicked glances. They had no answer. They hadn't even bothered to look at Arthur's supporting documents. "Was this," Keanu asked quietly, his eyes narrowing, "an oversight? Or is it standard procedure to use technicalities like this to deny claims, especially from claimants like Mr. Pendleton, who might not have the resources to fight back?" He noticed a particular coding on Arthur's file that seemed unusual. "Is this coding standard for all disability claims, Mr. Holloway? Or does it signify something else? Perhaps a category of claimant deemed less likely to appeal?" Holloway started sweating profusely. "Of course not. It's just an internal reference code." "We'll see about that," Keanu said softly. Cornered and terrified, Preston Holloway knew the game was up, especially with the threat of losing a major corporate account looming over him. All right, he exclaimed, throwing his hands up in surrender. There seems to have been an error in processing, a misinterpretation of the clause. Mr. Pendleton's claim, it should have been approved. We'll correct the system immediately. Keanu nodded slowly. Good, now apologize. Holloway, swallowing his pride, turned awkwardly to Arthur. Mr. Pendleton, on behalf of Apex Assurance, I apologize for the inconvenience and misunderstanding regarding your claim. It was forced, insincere, but it was a start. Chloe mumbled a similar apology, her eyes fixed on the floor. Arthur looked from Keanu to Holloway, relief washing over his face, though the hurt remained in his eyes. Thank you, he whispered. Keanu stepped forward again. This isn't just about fixing one claim, Mr. Holloway, he said firmly. I want to know how many other system errors like this have occurred, and I want your assurance that procedures will be reviewed to ensure this never happens again. He pulled out his phone. I will also be contacting Apex Corporate directly to report my observations regarding your office's customer service standards and potential discriminatory practices. I'll need the contact information for your direct superior. Holloway looked like he was about to collapse. Yes, Mr. Reeves, of course. Anything you say. Keanu turned to Arthur. I'll make sure everything is handled correctly for you, Mr. Pendleton. The elderly man's eyes filled with grateful tears. I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Reeves. If you hadn't, you defended your rights, Keanu said gently. I just provided a little backup. Then raising his voice slightly so everyone in the lobby could hear clearly, he declared, Remember, no one anywhere has the right to treat you like you are less than. Your age, your clothes, your situation, none of it matters. You deserve respect. Never be afraid to stand up for what is right. A wave of applause filled the lobby. People who had previously looked away now nodded in agreement, inspired by his words and actions. Keanu made sure Arthur had the direct contact information he needed and saw that his claim was being actively processed correctly before turning to leave. He gave Arthur a supportive nod, cast one final, hard look at Holloway and Chloe, and walked out of the office. The aftermath was swift. Keanu Reeves's complaint, coupled with the inevitable social media buzz from witnesses, forced Apex Assurance into damage control mode. An internal investigation was launched immediately. Preston Holloway and Chloe Vance were suspended and later quietly terminated. The company issued a public apology and announced a comprehensive review of their claims processing, particularly for elderly and vulnerable clients, promising greater transparency and sensitivity training for all staff. Arthur Pendelton received his full disability payments, backdated, along with significant compensation for the distress caused. More importantly, his dignity was restored. His story, shared anonymously by others, became a small symbol of hope for those battling similar bureaucratic indifference. Keanu Reeves, as always, retreated from the spotlight generated by the incident. He had simply done what felt right. As he rode his Norton away from the cold glass tower of Apex Assurance, under the vast California sky, he reflected. It wasn't just about one man, one office. It was about the pervasive tendency of systems and the people within them to overlook the humanity of those deemed less important. It was a reminder that sometimes all it took was one person stopping, observing, and choosing not to remain silent, to crack the facade of indifference and let a little light in. The fight for dignity often began in the most unexpected places, under the harshest fluorescent lights, and sometimes the quietest interventions created the loudest echoes.